So we have 4 types of connective tissues. We have the proper connective tissues, we have cartilage, we have bone, and number 4 is, got myself a brand new pen here. Number 4 is blood. There we go. Yeah, close enough. All right. Blood is a tissue. And like other connective tissues, we see the same pattern of a relatively low number of cells with lots of extracellular matrix. In the case of blood, this matrix has its own name. The matrix of blood tissue is called plasma. Now, plasma is a true liquid.
Bless you.
So blood is a liquid tissue. Right. The cells of blood are not normally interconnected or bonded to each other by fibers. Watch your drink here.
Well, sorry.
All right, just, well, you can just sit there, be calm, and throw it away on the way out. All right. So when we look at blood through the microscope, now this, I don't even have the picture from your book, but that's one picture of blood. Here's a bigger one. We all know bigger's better, right? Yeah, okay. All right, so what we see when we look at blood underneath the microscope is that the various types of cells are not linked to each other or bonded to each other or connected to each other by fibers. In fact, we don't see any fibers here at all, right? Normally, blood does not have any fibers in its matrix, but it does have fiber-forming components. And these fibers will form when the blood is stimulated to clot. So blood clots do have solid protein fibers. So this is a true connective tissue. It has fiber-forming materials, and under certain circumstances, it will actually form those fibers. All right, so we've got several different types of cells here. By far the most abundant cell in the blood, the ones that are the highest percentage, the biggest numbers, are these guys that you're seeing here, these little red discs. These guys are called the erythrocytes. And in Latin, erythro or eryth is the term for red, and cyte is the term for cell. So in Latin, these guys are the red blood cells. These guys are fairly distinctive. Let's see, I seem to remember I had a picture here of red blood cells. No, that's not it. No, that's not it. No. Nope. That's a tooth. What's that doing in there? All right, yeah, we saw this one before, all right. So this is pretty much our typical red blood cell or erythrocyte. They're very distinctive in both their shape and their color. Well, keep your hands to yourself. All right, so what color are red blood cells?
Red.
Red, okay. So, and unlike most of our tissues, which really don't have a lot of color until we put some stain on them, these guys are in fact actually normally red in color, because the erythrocytes contain large quantities of a protein called hemoglobin. Now, part of the hemoglobin protein is atoms of iron. Hemoglobin contains atoms of iron. And I don't think I'm going to have to dig too hard here to ask you guys, what's the function of hemoglobin? What does this do?
Retain the oxygen.
Oxygen. It carries oxygen in the blood. It helps distribute oxygen from your lungs to all of the other organs and tissues. So it carries oxygen. And when iron gets attached to oxygen, it turns into iron oxide or rust. And iron oxide rust is red. Anybody who's had to scrape down their patio furniture before they could repaint it knows that iron oxide is red. So when hemoglobin binds oxygen, the iron is going to turn into iron oxide, and it is going to be bright red in color. The other kind of distinctive feature of these erythrocytes is their shape, and of course we're only interested in the one in the middle here. They have what's called a biconcave disc shape. All right, so y'all know I can't draw, but roughly, when we're looking at them through the microscope, we're looking at them from the top, they look round, all right? And there's this kind of little depression in the center. Well, there's actually a depression on both sides. So if I turn this kind of 90 degrees, all right, that's terrible. But what we have here is this kind of dip or depression in the center, a concavity in the center on each side. So it's not actually a sphere, it's more like a disc with these little depressions in the middle. Now, if I told you that this is a stained slide, that this slide has been stained with microscopy stains, there's one more thing about these erythrocytes that maybe you've caught on to and maybe you haven't. Maybe you've seen it and maybe you're not seeing it. Big hint. What are you not seeing with these erythrocytes?
The nucleus.
Nucleus, yeah. These cells, once they are released into the circulation, have no nucleus. All of our formed elements, all of our blood cells originate in the bone marrow. Our bone marrow manufactures these cells. And just before the erythrocytes finish their differentiation, just before they're mature and are going to be sent out into the circulating blood, the last thing they do is they throw out their nucleus and all their other organelles, and the cell will then collapse down into this biconcave disc shape. This is actually a pretty good shape for blood cells because they're going to have to pass through some very, very small blood vessels. Some of our blood vessels are pretty tiny, and that disc is actually kind of floppy. So if the whole cell has to kind of be bent in half in order to get through the blood vessel, it can do that. If it had its nucleus, if it had its Golgi, if it had its endoplasmic reticulum, it would be too stiff. It wouldn't be able to bend nearly as nicely. So in the circulating blood, there's no nucleus in the fully mature, fully developed red blood cells. The earlier versions, the less differentiated versions, the immature versions in the bone marrow did have nuclei, but it's like they throw it away just before they go out into the world to see what's out there. All right, so they're specialized for gas transport. We always think of them as carrying oxygen, but they also carry carbon dioxide. I think that's all I wanted to say about them. All right. The second type of cell that we're seeing here in this picture are called the leukocytes. Leuko means white, so these are the white blood cells. Now, we actually have several different types, so looking at them through the microscope, they're not all going to look the same. This is one particular type of white blood cell. This is a different type of white blood cell. This, like I said, is a stained preparation. So now they're looking kind of pink and purple. But again, if they weren't stained, they would have this kind of off-white, beige, ivory kind of color. I was trying to think of more Navajo white and what are some of the others? Ecru, and no, that's too brown.
Eggshell.
But eggshell, that's a good one, yeah. So, but they have this kind of whitish color. Naturally, we don't really see much in the way of features until we do put on some stain. All of the leukocytes, all of the white blood cells, are involved in one way or another in immune responses. Some of them are phagocytic cells. Some of them are secrete antibodies. Some of them are involved in inflammation. Some of them will take on things like fungi, parasitic worms. Some of them are involved in allergic reactions or allergies. I'll talk. Okay. So all of these are involved in one way or another in our various immune reactions to foreign pathogens, parasites, foreign substances or materials that we come in contact with. But they are much fewer in number than the red blood cells. In this picture, which is fairly typical, we're seeing dozens of red blood cells and only 2 white blood cells. So white blood cells are much lower in number than the red blood cells.
Would that be different with an autoimmune disease?
Yes. In fact, when your body is undergoing any kind of immune reaction, the number of white blood cells goes up. And so, for example, when your person has a bacterial infection or a viral infection or another viral infection, chances are your white blood cell count is higher, but it won't go above red blood cells. So there's always fewer white blood cells than there are red blood cells, but the numbers do go up when people are fighting off an infection or have worms or something, yeah.
So if you have an autoimmune disorder or disease that's in constant, I don't know what to call it, but it's like a constant.
Constantly active?
Yes.
Okay.
Constantly active. Does that mean the white blood cell would be higher at all times?
Yes. Yes, if the autoimmune disease is constantly active, then the white blood cell count would probably also be constantly elevated.
Now, they are not as malleable as the red blood cells?
No,
correct?
they're not. They're not as squeezable. But oddly enough, most of our white blood cells do have the ability to use their cytoskeleton to temporarily change their shape. So they'll kind of squish themselves down and squeeze through the small spaces. Yeah, they don't bend as much, but they will actually kind of do like a little amoeba thing and kind of, and then come back up. Yeah. The third type of cell, and it's not really a cell, also shows in this picture as these very tiny little purple dots here, and there's here, and there's a bunch of them over here, right? These guys are not really cells. These are what are called platelets. And these are actually cell fragments. They're not whole cells. And that's why when I wrote cell types up here, I put in parentheses the term formed elements. That seems to be the preferred term when we're talking about blood and the solids that are normally in blood, because the platelets are not really cells. They're pieces of cells. Like everybody else, they grew up in the bone marrow, and then the cells in the bone marrow just pulled themselves into a couple thousand pieces and sent the pieces out into the circulating blood. These guys are involved in blood clotting. And that's really all I want to say about them until you guys get to A and P2, because I'm just now doing that with my A and P2 class, and they're all sitting there going, ah, yes.
So are platelets considered cells?
They're
Or
not. They're considered formed elements.
Okay.
But they don't have the true cellular structure. Not anymore. So
they're just an element.
So here's what happens. In the bone marrow, big old cell, nucleus, cytoplasm, whatever, and it just pulls itself into about 2,000 to 3,000 pieces. And those pieces are the platelets. So they don't have cell structure anymore. There's no organelles, there's no organization of the cytoplasm. They're really just little blobs of membrane with little blobs of cytoplasm inside. Yeah.
Question, I know like the blood cells, they have like a decently long shelf life where they're constantly being reused until they can no longer be reused.
Mm-hmm.
Do the platelets have the same thing?
Yes. The platelets have actually, when you say decently long, actually that's not true. Most of our blood cells have a very short lifespan.
Well, isn't it like a week or two? No.
Don't you think that's a little short for cells?
Well, I
mean, you're going to live to be, 90 years old? Wouldn't you like your cells to last that long? Yeah, so no, actually blood cells are constantly being renewed and regenerated. So the bone marrow is constantly making new ones, and the old ones are being cleared out of the circulation by the spleen and to a lesser extent by the liver. So they estimate that you make, all right, red blood cells, since you brought this up, red blood cells have a lifespan of about 120 days once they leave the bone marrow and go into the circulation. And so you have a lot of them. So they estimate that somewhere around 2 billion red blood cells are made every day. That's billion with a B. And about 2 billion red blood cells are removed from your circulation every day. Now the white blood cells are a little bit more variable. Some of them are fairly short-lived, and you're right, you're remembering like a week or two. Some of them really don't live very long at all, even though they have all the stuff. Yeah, they've got the nucleus, they've got the cytoplasm, they've got the Golgi and the endoplasmic reticulum. But once they go out into the circulating blood, they don't really live very long. But some of them do. Some of these immune cells can last 10 years or more. So what they'll do is they'll go through the circulation. Every once in a while, they'll kind of leave and go into lymph nodes and tonsils, and they'll spend some time in the spleen, and then they'll go back through the circulation again. And so, but yeah, you have cells in your immune system, white blood cells, that can last a very long time.
Okay.
it's one of the great advantages because, of course, let's say now that you've been here tonight, you decide to go get your flu shot.
So they recall more.
All right. So the cells that become immunized against influenza will keep that memory of how to fight off influenza for maybe the next 5 to 10 years.
Right.
You'll never get that influenza. Next year's was another story, but yeah.
So then why did they recommend the shot?
Because it's a different virus every year.
Strain.
The virus mutates really fast.
Is that why the one that people are getting right now and being hospitalized is because it mutated?
Well, what they have to do when they make the vaccine is they have to kind of start early. They can't just make the vaccine in November when people start coming down with the flu. They have to make it early. So the health people try to kind of guess about 6 months in advance which version of the virus is going to be the dominant one, which one they need to make the vaccine for. And this year they guessed wrong. So the one that they have a vaccine against is not the one that turned out to be the one that's going across the country and is severe enough to hospitalize people. If they guessed that virus, then that would be what the vaccine would be and people would be safe.
Okay, so the flu shot is really like
It's kind of a gamble, yeah. They're guessing which virus is going to be this year's flu. Yeah.
I think they said something like 30% efficacy after 2 weeks is their estimate.
Yeah, I'm hearing 10%, so
It was up to it varies.
yeah, I'm hearing different stories about that, but
there's no beds available at Antlers County Hospital.
really?
Yeah.
Do they have people out in the tents?
No, but the other two hospitals were on diversion and mine was the only one.
Yeah, I know there was something on the news about how one of the hospitals, I don't know even if it was here in Florida, but they were so overwhelmed that they were putting the overflow out in tents in the parking lot.
And we're talking about that. The Waterman and South Lake are completely packed full of beds on
Yeah. Yep. We do appreciate you coming in and taking the test tonight, but let's hope it doesn't progress to the point where you're in a
Well, that's
tent
why I
in the
missed those
parking
2
lot of the
classes that
hospital.
one.
Yeah, yeah. All right.
Charlotte chose not to share that.
Yes.
But I got
Now we're all also counting on you guys to wash your hands often. In fact, I would recommend everybody soap and water, wash your hands often. Because that was really the most common way that people get the flu. It's not because she's breathing on me. It'll be because she was coughing on her test and rubbing her nose and then marking on her paper. And then when I'm going through the test, I'm like, and I'm doing that, and then her virus is now in my system. That's how you get the flu. And you break that chain of infection by washing your hands with soap and water. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, but making the vaccine is kind of a hit or miss deal, and some years they get it right, and this year not only did they get it wrong, but wrong enough that the virus that's actually going around is a serious situation. Yeah.
I have another question with the platelets.
Platelets.
How does it decide which blood cells to break apart?
Well, they have pathways of differentiation. I don't have the picture here with me, but you know I can't draw. Okay. All right. So in the bone marrow, there are stem cells that can really turn into anything, but they're going to divide and divide and divide, and the progeny will become red blood cells.
Oh, okay. So it's not like they wait until the blood cells made and then I'm gonna pick this one and then rip it apart.
Or they can do this. They can follow a different pathway, and the progeny will become white blood cells. Or they can become platelets. So it's which path of differentiation the cell, that particular parent cell, is going to start off on.
So, But then you say that the platelets are cell fragments.
They're cell
correct?
fragments, right?
So then doesn't that mean that they have to be an original cell before
There
they
was.
become fragments?
Yes. And so as part of this differentiation, the stem cell is going to divide and become a different kind of cell, and it's going to divide in a different kind of cell. And then it's going to become what is called a megakaryocyte.
And that's the original cell before it
That's
gets
the cell
destroyed.
before it comes apart. Karyocyte. Yeah. So the stem cell in the bone marrow will divide to make 2 more, and then those cells will divide and make 4 more, and then they'll divide and make 8 more of something. And each step along the way, genes are getting turned on and genes are getting turned off, and the cell's looking a little different. It's getting a little bigger. And so each round of division, we're getting closer and closer to the end until we get to a big, big, big cell, mega karyocyte. That's why I drew it so big. And then that one just shatters into a couple thousand pieces. And the pieces are what go out into the circulating blood as platelets.
So what does its cell structure look like? I mean, does it also not have then a nucleus?
Oh no, it's got the whole kit and caboodle. See, I drew in the nucleus.
Okay.
So this is a true cell. This is just a really, really big cell in the bone marrow. And then it kills itself.
Bigger than a white blood cell?
Yeah. Mega karyocyte.
Right.
Yeah, they're really big. And then it just pulls itself into little bitty pieces, and little bitty pieces go out into the circulating blood as platelets. And the cell is dead, it's gone. Well, it's not dead, it's gone. Yeah, but so they come from cells, they're made from cells.
So if it has the nucleus when it breaks up, then the fragments, do they each have a piece of the nucleus or not?
I'm not sure. That's a really good question. I don't believe so, but I don't know for sure.
Okay.
He's really struggling with this.
No, I'm just curious.
Yeah, he's just like, where does it go? Where does it come from? I used to do a lecture in biology near the beginning of the semester where we talked about all the characteristics of life. What are the characteristics all living things share? And so, all living things grow, all living things reproduce, all living things take in nutrients, all living things give off waste. And sure as shooting, somebody in the class would say all living things die. I'd say, well, no, they don't. Right? They can, but they don't have to. Because when cells divide, the old cell splits apart, and those are considered 2 new cells. The old cell is gone, but it didn't die. And in its place, we now have 2 new cells. And everybody in the class would be sitting there going, wow, that's deep. I need to be smoking some dope when I think about that. So
I thought entropy was a classification of living things.
well, it's what happens to everything in the universe. Entropy just rules, whether you're alive or not. But entropy isn't the same as death.
No?
No.
I thought you die because of entropy.
Well, yeah. But not all entropy is death. All right, for example, right here, okay? This is not a living thing, right? Okay. But this is experiencing entropy.
Okay.
Electrical energy is being brought into the machine, and it's being converted into light energy. That's what I want. But because no transfer of energy is 100% efficient, some of the energy is being lost as heat, and that's why the little fan is running, which also requires more electricity and also generates more heat. Right? So, but it's not dying. It's just changing form. So entropy is the loss of usable energy. And yeah, if you lose your ability to convert food nutrient energy into ATP energy, you're going to die. And yes, so you can say it's due to entropy, but not all entropy is death. It affects everything in the universe. Are you trying to get my attention, or was your hands just up? Okay. You're not interested in entropy and death and taxes and all that kind of stuff? Yeah, because those, of course, are supposed to be the two constants in the universe, death and taxes. And again, it's not dying, and it's not paying taxes.
True.
Right, but it is experiencing entropy.
But it's not a living thing.
But it's not a living thing. This cannot grow, this cannot reproduce, this cannot take in nutrients, this will not give off wastes. Okay, all right. Now let's talk about the plasma, right? That matrix of blood. Right? It is a clear, slightly yellow, solution. It is mostly water. Right. We also have a fair amount of dissolved salts and minerals. I'm sure at least at one point or another, all of you have tasted blood. Maybe you had a bloody nose. Maybe you had a sore in your mouth. Maybe you got a little boo-boo and you do what people do. You licked it, right? So you probably tasted blood. You know it tastes salty, right? It also contains a lot of small organics. Small organic substances such as sugars, amino acids, and we have a fair number of complex molecules such as proteins. One of these proteins that we find in abundance in plasma is the protein fibrinogen. Our plasma always contains some of this protein. And it is a soluble protein. It dissolves into the water. It is carried with the plasma as part of this liquid. But when the blood is stimulated to clot, fibrinogen will be converted into a slightly different protein called fibrin. And that is insoluble. It falls out of solution and forms the fibers of the blood clot. Fibrinogen is the plasma protein that can, when stimulated, form the fibers of a blood clot. Which are called fibrin fibers, yes. I just thought of a great test question. The fibers of a blood clot are made of A, collagen, B, elastin, C, keratin, D, fibrin, E, hemoglobin. Fibrin, yeah. Not collagen, which was what in all the other connective tissues. No. I said I just thought of this for the next test. Yeah. I can't really test you on something I haven't told you yet. I could, but it would be mean. All right. Oh, that one doesn't have any holes. That's why it won't go in. All right. So that is the blood as a tissue. We'll talk about the blood a great deal more, its structures and functions, and a lot of the stuff that you guys asked about tonight when we get to A and P2. I'll worry about that later. All right. All right, so we're actually going to start our first body system which is the integumentary system. In humans, this system includes, get this right, skin, hair, nails, and their associated glands. In other animals, this would also include things like fur, feathers, horns, antlers, and claws. But we don't have fur, feathers, horns, antlers, or claws, so we're not going to worry too much about those. Right. It would be, wouldn't it? Yeah. See, now you guys are starting to think like a teacher. Starting to think, what can I expect on this upcoming test? Fur and feathers and horns and antlers. By the way, this is a good one. Do you know the difference between horns and antlers?
One's made of keratin. Are they both made of keratin?
Yeah, well, you're on the right track. One falls off and one doesn't. That's right. Horns are permanent and antlers come off.
Okay.
Yes, and you're right. Horns typically have a core of bone, although there's a keratinized covering of sort of like skin over it. But antlers are just an extension of the skin in essence. They're a keratinized structure with some blood vessels at the beginning, and then the blood vessels clamp off, and the tissue dies and they fall off. Right. So yes, so antlers fall off and horns don't. The things I know, I'll tell you. All right. We're going to be starting with skin. Skin is one of the largest organs of the human body. It is, in fact, an organ. It is made from many different tissues. And it also has a number of different functions. Would someone like to propose a function for skin? Protection, yes. All right, hang on, I'll get back to you. Now, protection from what? Alien invaders.
Water.
Do you need protection from water?
Absorb all the water around.
All right. All right, so you guys are kind of on the right track. All right, it protects you from dehydration. Right? Yeah, it's more important for keeping water in than for keeping water out. Although you are right, if you're walking out in the rain, you don't have to worry about absorbing all that water by osmosis and suddenly swelling up to twice your normal size. But it's much better keeping water in, actually, than keeping water out. Because I know anybody who's spent any time in a swimming pool or the bathtub knows that you actually do absorb some water by osmosis. That's where the wrinkly bits come from. Right?
I thought that was loss of oil.
No, it's water. The dermis of the skin is able to absorb the water, even though the epidermis won't. So what'll happen is the epidermis stays flat, and then the dermis starts to swell, and that throws the whole thing into the ridges.
The ridges actually help you with an underwater grip. Once you're-
That makes sense.
Get all pruny and-
Yeah, so the pruny wrinkles are from osmosis, yeah.
So how does it not swell more?
Because the epidermis won't. It won't absorb water.
But
It's got we'll explain it when we get there.
Okay.
All right. It'll make more sense when we talk about the structure. All right. What else? What other kinds of protection?
temperature regulation?
Well, all right. I'll put that down, but not in the same category. All right. Protection from. Someone said trauma. All right. So mechanical damage. Back in my drinking days, I'd usually wake up in the morning with all kinds of bruises. Yeah, you get drunk, you stagger around, you bang into things all the time. Your skin has to take on that kind of abuse, all right? It also provides us protection from chemical damage. All right. Alcohol, yeah, but I was thinking more along the lines of soap, cleansers, You know, if you change your own oil for your car, the motor oil gets all over your skin. You're not really absorbing much of that because the skin is going to be a protection, all right? And it also acts as a physical barrier to microorganisms. Just by having the skin there, it is physically blockading bacteria and viruses from getting into your blood, your connective tissues, your softer tissues underneath, right? You wanted thermoregulation. How does skin help you with thermoregulation?
Cools it
Now,
off.
hang on, it's her this is hers. Yeah. How does it do that? Do you know? All right. Yes, it does actually work for both hot and cold.
Sweating.
Yeah, sweating when you're overheated, and there's a big old layer of adipose tissue just underneath your skin that will help hold the heat in when it's cold.
And this is the goosebumps, correct? No? Yeah?
Well, goosebumps don't do you any good as far as keeping your body heat in. Again, we'll talk about the goosebumps, but it's for human beings with the kind of hair we have, it's completely useless. Yeah. If you were a dog or a bird, and you fluffed up your hair or you fluffed up your feathers, it would help. We don't have that kind of hair. It's just pointless, but we still do it anyway, because like a lot of things, we just do that are pointless.
Like
Right?
our appendix?
Yeah, kind of like that. All right. The skin also contains sensory receptors. We perceive the world around us. We know what's going on in the world around us, in part through the sensory receptors in our skin. In particular, light touch, deep pressure. You know the difference between a mosquito walking across your skin and somebody grabbing your arm. We have sensory receptors for pain, for heat, and for cold, all in our skin. All right, these are pretty much the obvious ones. There's one more, and then I'm going to let you go for the night. But there's one more that maybe didn't occur to you, because it doesn't occur to most people. One of the things our skin does is it manufactures vitamin D. But in order for it to do that, it has to be exposed to ultraviolet light. Indoor light like we've got now is not going to do it. It has to be ultraviolet light. Sunlight is best. So you go out in the sun, your skin is using that energy with entropy to convert cholesterol into vitamin D. You can manufacture your own vitamins if you get enough sunlight. At least that one. All right, I'm going to call it quits.